We leave behind the administrative wing and its yellowed papers, moving now through corridors that grow narrower, more intimate. The signs along the wall, though faded and peeling, still point the way to the pediatric ward with cheerful arrows that have lost their color to time. Our footsteps echo softly against linoleum floors that once squeaked beneath the wheels of small wagons carrying children too ill to walk. The air here feels different somehow, lighter perhaps, or tinged with a sweetness that memory alone can conjure. As we round the corner, the entrance to the children's wing reveals itself, marked by a mural that stretches across the entire wall, a painted landscape of friendly animals having a picnic beneath an impossibly blue sky. The colors have faded to gentle pastels now, the bears and rabbits rendered ghostly by decades of dust and shadow, but their smiles remain, eternal and patient, waiting for children who will never return. We pause here at the threshold, placing our hand against the double doors with their small circular windows, and we push forward into a place where innocence and illness once existed side by side. The doors swing open with a sigh, as if the wing itself has been holding its breath, and we step inside. Immediately, we notice the scale of everything. The drinking fountains mounted lower on the walls, the handrails built for smaller hands, the windows positioned so that even the youngest patients could gaze outside at the world they temporarily left behind. The ceiling here is painted with clouds and birds in flight, a sky brought indoors for those who could not go out to meet it. Some of the paint has peeled away, revealing the industrial gray beneath, but enough remains to understand the intention, the kindness embedded in these walls. We move slowly down the main hallway of the pediatric wing, and with each step, we notice more details emerging from the shadows. There, on a windowsill to our left, sits a small stuffed rabbit, its fur matted and gray with age, one button eye missing, the other staring out at nothing. Beside it rests a wooden toy car, red paint chipped away to reveal bare wood underneath, its wheels still capable of turning, though no child's hand has pushed it in decades. These objects wait in perfect stillness, abandoned but not forgotten, each one a silent testament to a presence that once filled these halls with laughter and tears, and the particular resilience of young spirits facing impossible challenges. We reach out and gently touch the rabbit's ear, feeling the stiff fabric beneath our fingertips, and something in us aches with a tenderness we cannot quite name. Deeper into the pediatric wing we venture, passing doorways that open into small patient rooms, each one a capsule of frozen time. The beds remain, their metal frames painted in that particular institutional cream color, their thin mattresses long since compressed and stained by time and moisture. Beside each bed stands a small metal nightstand, and on many of these we find treasures, coloring books with half-finished pictures, the crayons still resting in the binding. Get well cards with childish handwriting proclaiming, "I miss you and come home soon." Plastic cups with cartoon characters faded beyond recognition. In one room, we discover a mobile still hanging from the ceiling, its paper birds and stars rotating ever so slightly in the air, current we've created by opening the door. We stand and watch it turn, the gentle motion hypnotic and peaceful, and we can almost hear the lullabies that once played here, the whispered stories told by tired parents sitting in chairs that have long since been removed. The walls of these rooms are painted in soft colors, pale yellow, mint green, the palest pink, and though the paint has bubbled and peeled in places, revealing the layers beneath like geological strata of care and renovation, the gentleness of the original intention remains. We notice how the painters took care around the light switches, how they edged carefully along the baseboards, how they created an environment meant to soothe and comfort rather than intimidate. On one wall, we find a height chart, its measurements marked in both feet and centimeters, with small lines and dates written in pencil beside them. Growth tracked and celebrated even here, even in this place of illness and treatment. We run our fingers along these marks, feeling the slight indentation of the pencil pressed into plaster, and we wonder about the children who stood against this wall, proud to have grown an inch or two despite everything their bodies were enduring. In the corner of another room, we discover a bookshelf still half filled with children's books, their spines sun-faded and warped by humidity. We carefully extract one volume, a picture book about a brave little engine, and open it to find a library card still tucked in the front pocket. Names are written there in various hands. A circulation history of young readers: Emma, 1984, Michael, 1985, Sarah, 1986. We close the book gently and return it to its place, these names echoing in our mind like a whispered roll call from the past. As we continue our exploration, we become aware of a sound, soft, rhythmic, constant. Drip, drip, drip. Somewhere above us, water is leaking through the deteriorating roof, finding its way down through layers of flooring and ceiling tiles, finally releasing itself in a steady percussion that fills the silence. We follow the sound, turning down a side corridor where the damage is more visible, ceiling tiles hanging at angles or missing entirely, water stains spreading across the remaining panels like Rorschach images. The water collects in a depression in the floor, creating a small pool that reflects the dim light filtering through a distant window. We stop here and simply listen to the rhythm of the drops, each one striking the water's surface with perfect regularity, creating ripples that spread outward and dissipate. There is something deeply calming about this sound, this evidence of nature slowly reclaiming the artificial spaces humans have built. The water cares nothing for the hospital's history or its secrets. It simply follows gravity's patient insistence, wearing away at concrete and metal, dissolving plaster and paint, returning everything eventually to elements and dust. We breathe in sync with the dripping water. Breath in, drop falls, breath out, ripples spread, and we feel our heartbeat slowing, matching this natural metronome. The air here is thick with moisture and the scent of mildew, but it is not unpleasant, merely earthy and real, honest in a way that the antiseptic smells of an operating hospital never could be. Near the pool of water, we notice a door marked Records Room, and we try the handle, finding it unlocked. The door swings open with a creak that harmonizes with the water's rhythm, and we step into a space lined floor to ceiling with filing cabinets and shelves. Here, the pediatric wing's documentation rests in ordered rows. Patient files, treatment logs, medication records, all preserved in this dry room despite the water damage outside. We move to the nearest filing cabinet and pull open a drawer, revealing folders in pristine condition, their tabs labeled with names and patient numbers from decades past. We select one folder at random and open it carefully, finding inside a complete medical history of a child admitted in 1955 for treatment of a blood disorder. The handwriting is impeccable, the notes detailed and thorough, but as we read further, we begin to notice peculiarities. References to experimental protocols and trial medication series appear frequently, dosages that seem to change without clear reasoning, observations noted in language that suggests uncertainty rather than medical confidence. We continue reading through the files, pulling folder after folder, and a pattern begins to emerge from the decades-old documentation. During the 1950s and early 1960s, the pediatric wing at Mercy General Hospital participated in clinical trials for various treatments, some for genuine childhood diseases, but others for conditions that seem vaguely defined, almost intentionally obscure. We find references to treatments for nervous conditions in children as young as 5, to experimental surgeries meant to address developmental abnormalities that are never fully explained. The language is clinical and distant, but between the lines, we can sense the human stories. Children separated from their families for weeks or months at a time, subjected to treatments whose full implications their parents likely never understood, monitored and measured and observed as subjects rather than patients. There is no malice in these records, but there is a cold efficiency that chills us even as we remain calm, observing these facts from the safe distance of many decades. We close the folders and return them to their drawers, these stories tucked away once more into darkness and order. Moving to another section of the records room, we discover shelves filled not with files but with boxes labeled unclaimed personal effects. We lift one box down and open it, finding inside the small treasures that children brought with them to their hospital stays. A harmonica, tarnished but still capable of sound. A diary with a tiny lock, its pages filled with the looping handwriting of a young girl describing her days in the ward. a baseball card collection wrapped in a rubber band that has long since perished, a small jewelry box containing a locket with photos so faded we can barely make out the faces of the people meant to be remembered. Box after box contains these fragments of interrupted childhoods, and we handle each item with reverence and care, acknowledging the lives they represent. Why were these things never claimed? Did families move away, unable to return to a place of such painful memory? Did some children never leave the hospital, their belongings becoming orphaned along with their spirits? The records do not tell us, and perhaps it is better not to know every answer, to let some mysteries remain mysterious, some sadness stay soft and undefined. We return the boxes to their shelves, these personal effects once again resting in their long sleep, and we move back out into the hallway where the water continues its patient dripping, marking time in the only way time needs to be marked here. Steadily, inevitably without judgment or haste, we walk slowly back through the pediatric wing, retracing our steps, but seeing everything now through the lens of what we have learned. The cheerful murals take on a different quality, not sinister, but poignant, efforts at brightness in a place defined by struggle and uncertainty. The toys on the windowsills become more than abandoned objects. They are markers of presence, proof that children existed here, played here, hoped here, even if the outcomes of their stories remain unknown to us. We pause once more in the hallway where the water drips into its small pool, and we sit down on the floor, our backs against the wall, and we simply rest here in this space where so much life once pulsed through the corridors. The dripping water continues its rhythm, and we close our eyes, listening. In the darkness behind our eyelids, we can almost hear them, the soft sounds of children's voices, not sad or frightening, but gentle and far away, like the memory of a memory. A laugh echoing from one of the rooms, the squeak of a toy being wound up, the rustle of pages as a nurse reads a bedtime story. These sounds do not disturb us, they comfort us, reminding us that even in places marked by pain, there was also care, also love, also the stubborn insistence of the human spirit to find joy wherever possible. We breathe deeply, slowly, letting the air fill our lungs, and then releasing it in a long, peaceful exhale. The pediatric wing has shared its secrets with us, not the dark, terrible secrets we might have feared, but the quieter truths about how medicine has evolved, how ethics have shifted, how even well-meaning institutions can house practices that later generations will question. But we also found evidence of resilience and hope, of small hands that colored pictures, and larger hands that painted clouds on ceilings. We found the echoes of small voices that once called this place home, however temporarily, and we honored them by bearing witness to their presence. Now, as we prepare to move deeper into the hospital's mysteries, we carry these stories with us, letting them settle into our hearts like sediment drifting to the bottom of a still pond. We open our eyes, rise slowly to our feet, and take one last look at the pediatric wing before moving toward the doorway that will lead us downward into the lower levels where different secrets await. The water continues to drip behind us, a heartbeat that will persist long after we have gone, keeping time for the memories that remain. We turn from the pediatric wing, leaving behind the faded murals and the rhythmic dripping water, and find ourselves standing before a heavy metal door marked with peeling letters that once read, "Basement access, authorized personnel only." The door opens with surprising ease, as if it has been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to finally descend into the depths where the hospital's deepest secrets have rested undisturbed for decades. A stairwell stretches downward before us, concrete steps worn smooth by thousands of footfalls from another era, each step descending into cooler air, into deeper shadow, into the quiet places beneath the earth where time moves differently. We place our hand on the metal railing, cold and solid beneath our fingers, and begin our descent, one slow step at a time, feeling the temperature drop with each level we pass. The sounds from above, the distant water, the whisper of wind through broken windows, gradually fade, replaced by a profound stillness that seems to absorb all noise, all movement, all urgency. Down here, there is only the gentle rhythm of our own breathing and the soft echo of our footsteps against concrete and tile. The walls are painted in that particular shade of institutional green that belongs to another age, a color that has faded and dulled over the years, now appearing almost gentle in the weak light that filters down from emergency fixtures, still somehow maintaining their dim vigil. We pass landings marked with faded floor numbers, B1, B2, going deeper still, and with each landing the world above feels farther away, more like a memory than a place we have just been. The air grows noticeably cooler, not uncomfortable but refreshing, like descending into a natural cave where the earth maintains its constant temperature regardless of the season above. There's a mineral scent here, the smell of concrete and old pipes, of water seeping slowly through foundations, of spaces that have been sealed and quiet for so long that they have developed their own particular atmosphere. Finally, we reach the bottom of the stairwell, where another door awaits, this one without any markings at all, just painted metal and a simple handle. We pause for just a moment, letting our eyes adjust to the deeper darkness here, letting our breathing slow and settle, preparing ourselves for what we might discover in these subterranean corridors where the hospital's daily life never quite reached, where the machinery of the building hummed and churned away from the eyes of patients and visitors. We push through the door and find ourselves in a maintenance corridor, a utilitarian space never meant to be seen by those who walked the floors above. Here the hospital reveals its infrastructure, its hidden workings, the arteries and veins that kept the building alive during its decades of operation. Pipes run along the ceiling and walls, painted in codes of color whose meanings have long been forgotten. Red for this system, blue for another, yellow for something else entirely. Some pipes are wrapped in deteriorating insulation, white fabric that crumbles at the slightest touch, releasing small clouds of dust that drift slowly in the still air before settling again. The corridor extends in both directions, lit by occasional bare bulbs that somehow still function, creating pools of amber light separated by stretches of shadow. The floor is concrete, marked with stains and the tracks of old equipment that was wheeled back and forth, maintenance carts and industrial cleaning machines, all leaving their marks in the permanent record of the floor itself. We choose a direction, moving slowly, letting our eyes travel over the details that accumulate in spaces like this. The junction boxes mounted on walls, their metal covers rusted at the edges, the painted arrows pointing to different sections of the basement, the numbers and letters that made sense in some long-lost organizational system. Water has found its way down here too, not actively dripping, but present in the dark stains that spread across the ceiling in organic patterns like strange maps of unknown countries, and in the small puddles that have collected in the low spots of the floor, perfectly still, reflecting the dim light like dark mirrors. The silence here is nearly absolute, a presence in itself, something that seems to have weight and texture, and our footsteps sound both loud and somehow distant at the same time, as if the sound is happening in a different moment, a different layer of time. We pass doors marked with cryptic labels, boiler room, electrical, storage 3B, each one closed, each one representing another small chamber in this underground maze. Some doors have small windows, reinforced glass threaded with wire, and we pause to look through them into dark rooms filled with obsolete equipment, machines whose purposes we can only guess at, their metal bodies slowly surrendering to rust and decay. There is something peaceful about this exploration, this slow movement through forgotten spaces, examining the bones of the building, the parts that supported everything above. The corridor leads us to a larger space, a room with higher ceilings and better lighting, and we realize we have entered the old morgue. The room is surprisingly clean, as if the nature of its purpose demanded a level of maintenance that has somehow persisted even in abandonment. The walls are tiled halfway up in white subway tile, now aged to a soft cream color, and the upper walls are painted that same institutional green we saw in the stairwell. In the center of the room stands a metal examination table, its surface gleaming dully in the fluorescent light that, remarkably, still functions here, a steady hum barely audible at the edge of perception. The table is empty, of course, just a piece of medical equipment, nothing more, but it draws the eye nonetheless as the focal point of the space, the place where so many stories ended, and where other stories, investigations, and autopsies and official records began. Along one wall stands a bank of metal drawers, the refrigerated compartments where bodies were once stored, each drawer marked with a number, a simple system for tracking and organization. We approach slowly, noting how some drawers are slightly ajar, not pulled open but just not fully closed, as if the last person to use them was interrupted or simply forgot to push them that final inch. We do not open them. There is no need, and something about this space encourages respect, even now, even in its abandonment. Instead, we turn our attention to the filing cabinets that line another wall. Tall metal units painted in that light gray color, common to institutional furniture of a certain era. These cabinets are where the paperwork lived, where the official record was kept, and unlike many of the documents we have seen elsewhere in the hospital, these files appear to be remarkably preserved, protected down here in the cool, dry environment of the basement. We approach the nearest cabinet and gently pull open a drawer which slides smoothly on its tracks with barely a whisper of metal on metal. Inside, we find folders arranged in neat rows, each tab labeled with a case number and a date, a chronological archive of the morgue's activities spanning years, decades perhaps. The folders are in various colors: manila, pale green, pale blue, some system of color coding that organized these records in ways we can only partially understand now. We select a folder at random, careful with its aged paper, and open it to find typed reports on thin paper, carbon copies that have faded to a pale purple, the text still legible but ghostly, like reading something from a dream. We settle into a more comfortable position, finding an old office chair that still rolls smoothly despite its years, and begin to examine the files more carefully, methodically working through the folders in the drawer we have opened. Each file tells a story, though the language is clinical, detached, written in the specialized vocabulary of pathology and medical examination. Names, ages, dates of death, preliminary findings, final conclusions. Each life reduced to a few pages of typed observations and official stamps. Most of the cases are unremarkable in the medical sense. Deaths from expected causes, illnesses and accidents, and the simple wearing out of bodies that had lived their allotted time. But as we continue reading, moving through months and then years of records, we begin to notice a pattern, a cluster of cases that appear over a specific period, a span of perhaps 18 months in the late 1960s. During this time, there are more files than in the periods before or after, a noticeable increase in the morgue's activity. And as we read the autopsy reports more carefully, we see that many of these deaths share common elements: unexpected complications during routine procedures, post-surgical infections that progressed with unusual speed, organ failures that the examining pathologist noted as inconsistent with the patient's overall health status. There are questions raised in some reports, careful professional language that nonetheless conveys uncertainty, phrases like "findings are atypical" and "cause of death remains unclear despite thorough examination," and recommend further investigation. We find follow-up notes in some files, references to administrative reviews and committee meetings, but no final conclusions, no definitive answers, just the questions themselves preserved here in these folders, like specimens in jars. The pattern is there, unmistakable once we have seen it, but whether it represents medical malpractice, contaminated equipment, some environmental factor, or simply a statistical anomaly is not revealed in these pages. The secret is here, documented in careful detail, but the interpretation, the meaning, the ultimate truth remains elusive, hidden between the lines of these faded reports. We continue reading, absorbed in the puzzle, the mystery unfolding across these files, and time passes without our noticing, measured only by the slow progress through the drawer, folder after folder, case after case, the evidence accumulating in our mind like pieces of a puzzle we may never fully solve, but cannot help trying to complete. Finally, we close the last folder we intend to examine and return it carefully to its place in the drawer, sliding the drawer shut with a soft click of the latch. We sit for a moment in the quiet morgue, reflecting on what we have discovered, on the questions raised and the answers that remain hidden. The cool air of the basement surrounds us like water, and we feel the weight of the building above, all those floors and rooms and corridors, All those stories we have explored and those we have not, pressing down gently, held up by these foundations, these deep places where the essential work happened away from the light. We rise from the chair and take a slow tour of the rest of the basement level, finding other rooms. Storage areas filled with outdated medical equipment still in its original packaging. A break room for the maintenance staff with a table and chairs, and a coffee maker that will never brew another cup. A laundry facility with industrial machines standing silent like monuments to cleanliness and order. Each room is a small world unto itself, preserved in this amber of abandonment, and we move through them like a visitor to a museum, observing, noting, remembering. The darkness down here is no longer unsettling, but has become almost comforting. A soft blanket that muffles everything, that smooths away the sharp edges of the world above. We find ourselves moving slower, breathing deeper, letting the profound quiet of the basement seep into our bones. This is a place of rest, despite its purposes, or perhaps because of them. A place where things came to an end, where questions were asked and sometimes answered, where the daily dramas of the hospital above were translated into official records and filed away. We make our way back toward the stairwell, but slowly, taking our time, letting our gaze linger on details. The pattern of water stains, the arrangement of pipes, the numbered doors, the accumulated layers of dust that have settled over everything like the softest snow. As we reach the door to the stairs, we pause and look back at the corridor stretching away into shadow, at the morgue with its files full of secrets, and we acknowledge what we have found here in the depths. Not answers exactly, but evidence, traces, the permanent record of things that happened and questions that were asked. We begin to climb, ascending slowly back toward the upper levels, carrying with us the cool quiet of the basement, the peaceful darkness, the sense of mysteries acknowledged if not entirely solved, ready now to continue our exploration into the other forgotten spaces of Mercy General Hospital. We ascend slowly through the stairwell, each step carrying us away from the cool depths of the basement, away from the morgue's quiet revelations and into new territories of forgotten history. The air changes as we climb, growing warmer, less damp, though no less still. Our footsteps echo softly in the enclosed space, a gentle rhythm that accompanies our steady upward movement. We pass the third floor, then the fourth, following the faded signs that point toward what was once called the Behavioral Health Unit, though the older, more weathered plaques simply read Psychiatric Ward in letters that have begun to peel and fade. At the fifth floor landing, we encounter our first barrier, a set of double doors with small wire-reinforced windows, sealed with chains that have rusted into a solid mass of oxidized metal. But time and neglect have loosened the doorframe itself, and with gentle pressure, we're able to slip through a gap just wide enough to enter. The space beyond greets us with a different quality of silence, one that feels somehow more inhabited, more watching, as though the emotions of those who spent their days here have left an imprint on the very air we breathe. The hallway stretches before us, narrower than the corridors below, with doorways lining both sides at regular intervals. The walls here are painted a color that might once have been called seafoam green, or perhaps institutional mint. One of those shades chosen decades ago for its supposedly calming properties, now faded to something between gray and pale turquoise, stained in places with water damage and the mysterious marks that accumulate when buildings are left to their own quiet decay. The floor is covered in old linoleum tiles, their pattern of interlocking squares barely visible beneath decades of dust. Our flashlight beam travels slowly down the corridor, revealing details piece by piece. A bulletin board still pinned with schedules from 1987, a medication cart tipped on its side, its small drawers hanging open and empty, and further along a desk where someone once sat to monitor the comings and goings of patients and staff. We move toward this nurse's station, our steps slow and deliberate, taking in each detail with the careful attention it deserves. On the desk surface, beneath a fine layer of dust, we can make out the ghostly rings left by coffee cups, the scratch marks from papers signed with heavy hands, the worn spot where someone's forearm rested day after day, year after year. A clipboard hangs from a hook, its pages curled and yellowed, and when we lift it gently, we see it contains a checklist, room numbers, names, medications, activities, the final day's schedule, never completed, frozen at the moment the ward closed its doors for the last time. We begin our exploration of the individual rooms, starting with the first door on our right. The door stands partially open, as though someone stepped out for just a moment and never returned. Inside, we find what appears to have been a patient room, small, perhaps 10 feet by 12, with a single window set high in the wall, its glass reinforced with wire mesh and covered now with grime that filters the moonlight into something soft and diffused. A metal bed frame remains against one wall, its thin mattress long since removed, leaving only the grid of springs that sag slightly in the center. Beside the bed, a small table holds a few personal items that were never claimed. A hairbrush with a tortoiseshell pattern, a small mirror with a crack running diagonally across its surface, and a water glass that has somehow remained unbroken through all these years. But it's what we find in the narrow closet that truly captures our attention. A stack of journals, perhaps 7 or 8 of them, bound in various colors of construction paper and cardboard, filled with handwriting that ranges from careful and controlled to wild and sprawling. We carefully remove the top journal and move to sit on the floor beneath the window where the light is slightly better. The cover is labeled simply Margaret, 1982, in neat cursive script. We open to the first page and begin to read, our voice soft and measured, letting the words of someone long gone wash over us like a gentle stream. Margaret writes about her arrival at Mercy General, about the doctors who smile with their mouths but not their eyes, about the other patients, some kind, some frightening, all lost in their own ways. She describes the routine of the ward. Breakfast at 7:30, morning group therapy at 9, medication at 10, lunch at noon, afternoon recreation, dinner, evening medication, lights out at 9 o'clock. Day after day, the same rhythm, the same faces, the same questions from doctors who write on clipboards and nod but never seem to truly hear. As we read entry after entry, we notice Margaret's handwriting beginning to change, becoming smaller, more cramped, as though she's trying to fit more and more thoughts into the limited pages available to her. She writes about dreams that feel more real than waking life, about memories that may or may not be true, about the thin line between remembering and imagining. Her words create their own kind of poetry, repetitive and rhythmic, and as we read them aloud in our slow, calm cadence, they begin to take on an almost hypnotic quality. We set Margaret's journal aside carefully and reach for another, this one labeled Thomas, 1979, in block letters that lean heavily to the right. Thomas writes differently, shorter sentences, more fragmented, but equally revealing. We continue our journey through the ward, moving from room to room, each one revealing its own collection of abandoned moments and forgotten stories. In one room, we find a calendar still turned to November 1987, with several dates circled in red ink, appointments perhaps, or days that held special significance, their meaning now lost to time. In another room, children's drawings cover one entire wall, taped up in overlapping layers, pictures of houses and families and sunshine, images of hope and home created by minds trying to hold on to something stable in an uncertain world. We pause before these drawings, studying each one with quiet attention, noticing the details. A family of stick figures holding hands, a dog with an oversized tail, a tree with apples that are really just red circles, each one a small window into someone's inner landscape. Further down the hallway, we discover the day room, a larger communal space where patients would have gathered for meals, activities, and the slow passage of institutional time. Here the furniture remains in place, chairs arranged in circles for group sessions, a television set in a wooden cabinet that would now be considered vintage, bookshelves holding a sparse collection of donated paperbacks with cracked spines and sun-faded covers. And in the corner, beside a window that looks out over the darkened city, we find what we've been unconsciously listening for since we entered this wing. A rocking chair, wooden and sturdy, moving ever so slightly in an air current we cannot feel, creating a soft, rhythmic creaking sound that fills the empty room with a presence both eerie and oddly comforting. We approach the rocking chair slowly, noting the wear patterns on its arms where countless hands have gripped, the depression in its seat, shaped by the bodies of those who sat here seeking solace, or simply a moment of quiet, rocking motion. Beside the chair, on a small side table, we find more journals. The ward seems to have encouraged writing as therapy, as a way for troubled minds to externalize their thoughts and perhaps find some order in the chaos. We settle ourselves nearby, our back against the wall, and select another journal to read. This one belongs to someone named Patricia, dated 1985, and her entries speak of treatments we now recognize as outdated and even harmful. Electroconvulsive therapy administered with what seems like casual frequency, medications that dulled the mind rather than treating the underlying conditions, isolation as punishment rather than as therapeutic intervention. Yet through Patricia's words, we also sense her resilience, her determination to hold on to herself despite the institution's efforts to reshape her into compliance. She writes about small rebellions, refusing to take her medication, speaking out in group therapy, maintaining friendships with other patients against staff disapproval. She writes about a plan to leave, to convince the doctors she is well enough to return to the outside world. We turn the pages slowly, reading Patricia's increasingly hopeful entries as she describes her progress, her good behavior, her participation in all the prescribed therapies. And then, abruptly, the entries stop. The remaining pages of the journal are blank, and there is no indication of whether Patricia achieved her goal of leaving Mercy General or whether something else intervened to silence her voice. We set Patricia's journal aside and sit for a long moment in the quiet of the day room, listening to the gentle creak of the rocking chair, the subtle sounds of the building settling around us, the distant drip of water we've carried with us from the floors below, the whisper of wind finding its way through cracks and gaps in the building's envelope, the almost imperceptible rustle of papers stirred by air movements too slight to feel. The mystery of what happened to Patricia, to Margaret, to Thomas, and to all the others whose journals we've discovered becomes part of the larger mystery of Mercy General Hospital itself. A place where people came seeking healing, but often found only more confusion, more isolation, more questions without answers. We rise slowly and continue our exploration, moving now toward the offices that line the far end of the ward. These would have been the private spaces of psychiatrists and social workers, the places where treatment plans were devised and case notes recorded. The first office we enter is surprisingly intact. A desk still holds a blotter calendar, a cup full of pens that have long since dried out, and a photograph in a wooden frame showing a doctor in a white coat standing beside a much younger building exterior, perhaps taken when Mercy General first opened its doors in the 1920s. Filing cabinets line one wall, their drawers partially open, revealing the edges of manila folders that have warped and faded with time. We open the nearest drawer fully and begin to carefully examine its contents. The files are organized alphabetically, each folder containing a patient's case history, intake evaluations, progress notes, treatment records, and in some cases, discharge summaries. But we also find files that end without discharge, patients who seem to have simply vanished from the records. One file in particular catches our attention. A patient admitted in 1986 with acute depression, treated with the standard protocols of the time, showing steady improvement according to the doctor's notes, and then, nothing. The final entry is dated October 15, 1987, just weeks before the hospital closed, and it notes that the patient has been transferred to another facility, but the destination is left blank. We find this pattern repeated in folder after folder. Transfers to unspecified locations, discharges without follow-up information, and in several disturbing cases, notations that patients have been moved to a special treatment program without any additional details about what this program entailed or where it was located. We spend what feels like hours in this office and the others nearby, carefully reading through case files, piecing together the fragmentary stories of people whose lives intersected with Mercy General Hospital during its final years. A pattern begins to emerge, a pattern of irregular documentation, of patients who arrived but whose departures were never properly recorded, of treatments that seem to have been experimental, or at least unconventional. We find references to a research program, something involving new therapeutic approaches, though the details remain frustratingly vague. There are mentions of a Dr. Castellan who seems to have overseen this program, but we find no personnel file for this doctor, no credentials, no photograph, just the recurring signature at the bottom of various documents, always in the same crisp, controlled handwriting. As we continue to read, our voice growing softer and slower with each page, we begin to understand that we may never know the full truth of what happened in these rooms, in this ward, in this hospital. Some secrets remain sealed not by locks or chains, but by the simple passage of time, by the failure of institutions to maintain adequate records, by the tendency of those in power to obscure rather than illuminate uncomfortable truths. And yet there is something oddly peaceful about sitting here among these old papers, these abandoned files, these whispered stories of people long gone. We are bearing witness, in our small way, to lives that might otherwise be completely forgotten. We are reading words that haven't been read in decades, giving voice once more to those who were silenced by illness, by institutionalization, by the closing of a hospital that could no longer sustain itself. The rocking chair continues its gentle creaking in the day room beyond, a rhythmic sound that has become almost meditative, and we let ourselves sink into that rhythm as we read the final files, the final patient notes, the final desperate or hopeful or resigned words recorded by doctors who themselves would soon be scattered to other positions, other hospitals, other lives. We carefully return the folders to their drawers, close the filing cabinets with soft clicks that echo briefly in the small office, and make our way back to the hallway. The psychiatric ward has revealed its secrets as much as it ever will. Stories of isolation and treatment, of human struggle and institutional indifference, of mysteries that may never be fully solved. We stand for a moment at the threshold of the day room, watching the rocking chair move in its endless, gentle rhythm, and then we turn toward the stairwell once more. Above us, one final location remains in our exploration of Mercy General Hospital, the rooftop garden where patients once went to feel the sun and breathe the open air. We begin to climb the last flight of stairs, carrying with us all the stories we've gathered, all the secrets we've discovered, ready now for the final chapter of our journey through this abandoned place of healing and haunting. The stairwell opens onto the rooftop, and immediately we feel the change, the transition from the enclosed, shadowed world below to this open space beneath the vast night sky. The door creaks softly as we push through, and before us stretches the rooftop garden, transformed by decades of neglect into something wild and strangely beautiful. Moonlight spills across everything, silvering the twisted vines that have claimed the railings, illuminating the tall grasses that sway gently in the night breeze. This was once a place of healing, where patients in wheelchairs and hospital gowns would come to feel sunlight on their faces, to remember the world beyond their illness. Now it belongs to the night, to the quiet, to the stories that have waited here for us to discover them. We step forward slowly, feeling the cool air on our skin, breathing deeply of the fresh wind that carries the scent of wild herbs and old stone. The city lights twinkle in the distance, but they seem far away, as if we've climbed into a separate realm entirely. Our footsteps are soft on the weathered tiles, some cracked and lifted by persistent roots, others still perfectly in place, holding their pattern after all these years. There are benches here, wrought iron turned to rust and verdigris, and planter boxes where roses once bloomed in careful rows. Now they overflow with wildflowers, with creeping ivy, with small trees that have taken root in the accumulated soil of decades. We move toward the center of the garden, where a circular space opens up, and here we find the first of what we've been searching for. A small metal box, tucked beneath one of the benches, partially hidden by the drooping branches of an overgrown lavender bush. We kneel down slowly, brushing away the dried leaves and the soft moss, and lift the box carefully. It's surprisingly light, and when we open it, we find letters, dozens of them, tied with a ribbon that has faded from red to pale pink. The paper is brittle with age, but the ink remains clear enough to read. These are letters written by patients, we realize, letters that were never sent, never delivered to the families and loved ones waiting for word. We settle onto one of the benches, feeling it sturdy enough despite its age, and begin to read by the gentle light of the moon. The words speak of hope and fear, of treatments and setbacks, of the simple desire to go home. One letter describes this very garden, how beautiful it was in spring, how the roses smelled like childhood memories. Another thanks a nurse named Margaret for her kindness, for staying late to talk when the nights grew too long and frightening. These are intimate windows into lives lived in this place, and as we read, we feel ourselves becoming witnesses to their stories, keepers of their memories. The wind continues its gentle movement around us, rustling through the papers, through the leaves, creating a soft symphony of natural sounds that begins to lull us into a peaceful state of receptivity. As we continue reading, moving from one letter to the next, we begin to notice patterns, recurring names, dates that cluster around particular months in the hospital's history. Several letters mention Dr. Whitmore, the physician whose name we encountered in records throughout our journey. Here in these personal accounts, he emerges not as the distant figure of official documents, but as someone the patients trusted, someone who listened. One letter describes how he would come to the garden and sit with patients, not rushing, not looking at his watch, just being present. Another mentions how he questioned certain treatments, how he advocated for gentler approaches when others wanted to pursue aggressive interventions. We set aside the letters carefully and rise to explore further, drawn now toward the far corner of the garden where a small shed stands, its door hanging slightly ajar. The hinges protest softly as we open it wider, and inside we find gardening tools, bags of old soil, terracotta pots stacked in the corner. But there's something else here too, a metal filing cabinet, incongruous among the gardening supplies, its surface dusty but intact. We pull open the top drawer and it slides surprisingly smoothly, revealing files, documents, papers that someone clearly hid here intentionally. These are copies of internal hospital memos, correspondence between administrators, financial records that tell a story of pressure and compromise. The hospital was struggling, we learned, facing bankruptcy in its final years. There were proposals to cut costs, to reduce staff, to accept funding from a pharmaceutical company in exchange for conducting drug trials. We see Dr. Whitmore's name again here, in letters where he objects to these plans, where he raises concerns about patient safety, about informed consent, about the ethical implications of what was being proposed. His words are measured but firm, and we can sense his growing frustration as memo after memo shows his concerns being dismissed. The hospital administration was desperate, and in that desperation they made choices that Dr. Whitmore believed crossed important lines. We carefully page through each document, and the story assembles itself piece by piece. The experimental treatments we discovered in the pediatric wing, the unexplained deaths in the morgue records, the mysterious disappearances from the psychiatric ward, they were all connected to these trials, to medications that hadn't been properly tested, to procedures that pushed beyond established protocols. And Dr. Whitmore, realizing what was happening, began documenting everything, copying files, gathering evidence. He was preparing to go public, we realize, to expose what was being done in the name of financial survival. We close the filing cabinet drawer gently and step back out into the garden, into the fresh air and moonlight, needing a moment to absorb what we've learned. The night surrounds us softly, the wind continues its patient movement, and somewhere in the garden, a night bird calls out, a sound both lonely and beautiful. We walk slowly to the edge of the rooftop, where a low wall provides a barrier, and we lean against it gently, looking out over the sleeping city. From this height, everything seems peaceful, the streets quiet, the buildings dark, except for scattered windows of light where others keep their own late-night vigils. We think about Dr. Whitmore, about the choice he faced, to stay silent and keep his position, or to speak up and risk everything. And we wonder what happened to him, whether he ever got the chance to reveal what he'd discovered. The answer, we sense, is somewhere here in this garden, waiting for us to find it. We turn back and walk toward the center of the rooftop again, and this time we notice something we missed before. At the very center of the circular space, there's a patch where the wild growth seems different, more deliberate. We kneel down and begin to carefully move aside the plants, the soft soil, and we discover stones placed in a pattern, marking a spot. Beneath the stones, wrapped in waterproof fabric that has mostly held against the years, we find a journal. Dr. Whitmore's personal journal, his final testament. We sit down right there on the ground, the earth cool beneath us, and we open the journal with reverent care. The entries begin months before the hospital closed, and they chronicle his growing alarm, his attempts to stop what was happening, his documentation of patients who suffered adverse effects from the experimental treatments. He writes about sleepless nights, about the weight of knowledge, about the oath he took to first do no harm. He describes going to the hospital board, to regulatory authorities, trying to find someone who would listen, who would investigate. But the pharmaceutical company had influence, and the hospital was too afraid of losing their funding, too desperate to survive. The entries grow shorter, more urgent as we page forward. He writes about threats he's received, about being told to stay quiet, about pressure from colleagues who fear losing their jobs if the hospital closes. And then we reach the final entries, written in this very garden. He describes sitting here at night, just as we are now, under the same stars, feeling the same wind. He writes that he's made his decision. He's compiled all the evidence, made copies, sent packets to newspapers, to medical boards, to anyone who might act on the information. He knows there will be consequences, he writes, but he cannot stand by while patients are harmed. The very last entry is dated 3 days before the hospital closed. He writes simply, "Whatever comes next, I know I've done what I could. I've told the truth. I hope it will be enough. Tonight the garden is beautiful. The roses are blooming. I can rest now." We close the journal slowly, holding it against our chest for a moment, feeling the weight of his courage, the peace he found in knowing he'd done the right thing. The hospital closed suddenly, we now understand, not because of financial failure alone, but because the truth came out, because Dr. Whitmore's evidence could not be ignored. We remain sitting in the garden, the journal resting in our lap, and we allow the full story to settle within us. This place, this abandoned hospital that we've explored through the night, was once a site of both healing and harm, of dedication and compromise, of ordinary people facing extraordinary moral challenges. The patients whose stories we've encountered, whose belongings we've seen, whose records we've read, they were caught in circumstances beyond their control, and most of them never knew what was truly happening. But some were helped by Dr. Whitmore's actions, we realize. When the hospital closed so abruptly, when the experimental programs were shut down, lives were saved. His courage made a difference, even if he never knew the full extent of it. We look around the garden with new eyes now, understanding why it feels different from the rest of the hospital. This was his sanctuary, the place where he came to think, to gather his strength, to reconnect with the purpose that drove him into medicine in the first place. Among these plants and under this sky, he found the clarity and courage to do what was right. We stand slowly, our legs a bit stiff from sitting, and we walk among the garden beds, touching the soft leaves of lavender, the rough bark of the small trees that have taken root here. Nature has reclaimed this space, turning it into something wild and free, but there's a beauty in that transformation, a kind of redemption. The stories don't end with closure or perfect justice. They rarely do in real life, but they end with truth, with someone choosing to speak despite the cost. We find ourselves drawn to one of the benches that faces east, toward where the sun will rise in a few hours, and we sit down, letting our body relax fully, letting the night hold us in its gentle embrace. The wind has softened to barely a whisper now, and the city sounds have faded to near silence. We can hear our own breathing, slow and steady, and the subtle sounds of the garden itself. Insects moving through grass, leaves brushing against leaves, the ancient building beneath us settling slightly, creaking in its long rest. We think about all the places we've been tonight, all the rooms we've explored, all the secrets we've uncovered. We carry these stories with us now, these memories of people we never met but feel we've come to know. And we understand that this is what remains when buildings are abandoned, when institutions fail, when time moves forward. The stories, the truths, the evidence of lives lived with courage or fear, with compassion or indifference. This hospital, for all its darkness and its secrets, was also a place where someone stood up for what was right. And that matters. that echoes forward through time. We remain on the bench, allowing ourselves to simply be present in this space, no longer searching, no longer exploring, just resting in the culmination of our journey. The moon has traveled across the sky during our time here, and now it sits low on the horizon, its light softer, gentler, as if it too is preparing for sleep. We think about Dr. Whitmore one last time, and we imagine him here on nights like this, finding peace among the plants, gathering his strength from the simple, enduring beauty of the natural world. He reminds us that courage isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, documented in careful notes and filed away in garden sheds, waiting for the right moment to emerge into light. The hospital behind us stands silent, holding all its stories, all its history, and we feel grateful to have been witness to even a small part of it. Soon we will leave this place, descending the stairs, walking back through the corridors and rooms we've explored, emerging into the dawn light outside those rusted front doors. But for now, we remain here in the garden, in this in-between space where earth meets sky, where past meets present. The stars above us are beginning to fade as the sky slowly, almost imperceptibly, starts its gradual shift toward morning. But dawn is still far enough away that we can rest here in the darkness a while longer, letting the peace of this place settle into our bones, into our breathing, into the quiet spaces of our mind. We close our eyes and feel the bench beneath us, solid and real. We feel the cool air on our skin, the gentle movement of it through the garden. We listen to the silence, which isn't really silence at all, but rather a symphony of small, soft sounds, the world continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human stories and human struggles. This is where the journey ends, not with answers to every question, not with perfect resolution, but with acceptance, with understanding, with peace. The hospital's darkest secrets are secrets no longer. They've been found, acknowledged, witnessed. And in that witnessing, something shifts. The stories can rest now, and we can rest too, here in this garden beneath the fading stars, surrounded by wild beauty and gentle night sounds, letting ourselves drift into the soft darkness of sleep, knowing that truth matters, that courage matters, that even in abandoned places and forgotten stories there is meaning, there is purpose, there is peace. We breathe slowly, deeply, letting each breath become softer, quieter as the garden holds us, as the night cradles us, as we finally, gently allow ourselves to sleep. Thank you for listening tonight. If this story helped you drift off, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more calming stories. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you next time.